In this recording, I'll share a little bit from Chapter 3 of Mindful Ethnography, Mind, Heart, and Activity for Transformative Social Research. This chapter is, in my view, one of the most important chapters for the book, not just for ethnographers, but for, I guess, the lessons I want to take from ethnography into living in the world. Because it's about getting in and along with clarity and compassion as we engage in activity in the world. For ethnographers, we're also trying to understand and analyze that world, but there's also just the part of how to connect compassionately and empathically with others and with ourselves. How to stay connected with our heads and our hearts as we immerse in activity in the field and draw from that some new and different understandings. So I discuss this in terms of ways of participating in spaces, ways of making the familiar even more strange, expanding our ways of seeing, looking from different perspectives, attuning with all our senses, but also about the relationships we engage in and the emotions that come up. So I'll read just a little bit from the section of Why Be Aware of Our Feelings. I want to suggest that becoming more aware of our emotional responses to fieldwork can enhance the doing of transformative social research for two somewhat contradictory reasons. On the one hand, this allows us to put some distance between our feelings and the conclusions we draw. This doesn't mean bracketing our feelings, dismissing their importance. It's not about treating them as interference to objectivity, but it's about inserting a pause so we can better contemplate what our feelings indicate. This can help us better recognize associations we make between our feeling senses and our thoughts. We will feel many things in our field sites. If we don't, we're not being human beings in the setting. We'll feel warmth, connection, love, joy, peace, anger, confusion, delight, I don't know. These feelings may lead us to have many thoughts. We may be quick to interpret the feelings. The feelings might be subtle. They might live more in our unconscious than our conscious minds. Pausing to notice can help us to avoid imposing our feelings and thoughts onto others and opening up space to consider how others experience these things. So that's one reason why. To attend to our feelings, not to pretend we can separate our thoughts and feelings, but to become more aware of our thoughts and our feelings as thoughts and feelings, and to open up the question of how others may think and feel. On the other hand, attending to our feelings may bring us closer to our participants. We may open up new channels of understanding when we engage closely with other human beings for an extended time, and when we notice what comes up. Nancy Shepherd Hughes was one of the first ethnographers to proclaim as a strength the practice of listening empathically and compassionately. She wrote, "Seeing, listening, touching, recording can be, if done with care and sensitivity, this can be acts of fraternity and sisterhood, acts of solidarity. Above all, they are the work of recognition. Not to look, not to touch, not to record can be the hostile act, the act of indifference and of turning away." I suggest ways of working when strong feelings are triggered and when they're not. Noticing when they're triggered can reveal our own interpretive processes, the ways our histories of experiences shape what we see and how we understand it, and they may illuminate something about what others feel. But it's also important to notice when we don't feel much of anything about what we see, because that may suggest what we've normalized and taken for granted. It may suggest ways we've shut down our own feelings. What are we not allowing ourselves to feel? And I think this is especially important if we're studying situations of injustice and suffering. What would it mean to not just study the suffering of migrants and refugees in contemporary migration crises, but to really feel the pain that mothers experience when they are separated from their children at the border? I also talk about when strong feelings are triggered in others and what is our responsibility as researchers when our presence may bring up feelings for others. And then I have a section about seeing others. I'll read a little bit from here. As I've discussed in other chapters, ethnography purports to be about seeing, writing the other into existence on the page. Doing this requires that we try to see the world from the perspective of whatever group or community we set out to study, from emic rather than Edic perspectives. But even before we can try to see the world as others see it, we have to first see those others in the world. Who do we see? And do we really see them? Who do we not see, or not see fully, or see only briefly but ignore? Here, I think, is where the best impulses of ethnography meet up with what is most needed in the world if we are ever to get past the seemingly basic human orientation to divide into groups of us and them, and to see the people we have othered, quote unquote, in flat, one-dimensional, and unreal ways. Here, too, is where a mindful approach to ethnography might help us to stretch and grow as humans, not just as researchers. And I'm not just talking about seeing the big others as marked by the salient lines of difference in our culture, by race, gender, social class, though that's important. I'm referring to the many ways we form ideas about some kind of presumed group. Teachers, doctors, lawyers, middle school teachers, students, the homeless, red state residents, private school principals, you name it. This can lead us to make assumptions without investigating to see if our ideas about these people are correct. It can lead us to gloss over within-group differences, and it can lead us to present these groups in flat, unidimensional, non-nuanced ways. There's the Nahuatl saying, "Tú eres mi otro yo." You are my other me. As ethnographers, are we willing to try to see ourselves in others and to see us in them? In all others, even those we would consider ourselves quite different from and maybe even oppositional to? Ones who hold very different beliefs about the world? Are we willing to try to understand both the views of those with whom we feel some affinity and the ones we might want to distance ourselves from or separate from? I recognize that for some readers the answer might be no, not willing. Histories of racism, sexism, misogyny, and other oppressions may lead us to not want to try to connect with people that we see as oppressors. A student told me years ago, quote, "If you're the enemy, I don't want to listen to you," unquote. This was an honest response based on his history of experiences with betrayals and power plays in the world. And perhaps he felt there was no need to listen to dominant perspectives because they abound all around. Recognizing the limits on how far we're willing to go in seeing others as our other me may be the best we can do. I go on in the book to think about noticing who we are drawn to, because I do think we tend to be drawn in fieldwork to people that for some reason we're trying to either we see more affinity with, or perhaps that we see as problematic in some way, and we miss other people that don't fall into those categories for us. We can notice who's drawn to us, who comes up to us and engages us more, so therefore whose ideas end up getting privileged. And I also have a section about listening and really hearing. What does it mean to really hear other people? Meditative practices can help us clear space in our own heads in order to really hear, to listen with our full attention, not focused on what we plan to say next, not with an ear to what we might agree or disagree with, like or dislike. We can listen to what people are saying and what they might be trying to say. Ethnography, mindful ethnography, builds on the best of ethnographic practices by assuming people make sense in their own cultural and social worlds, and that it is our job to understand what that sense is. We can do this by listening over and under the words, by slowing down our process attending to what's being said, what's not being said, what people seem to want to say that they're not quite saying, tuning into people's uncertainties, confusions, hesitations, and we can get better at recognizing our own. The first step to listening with open hearts is to notice when our hearts start to close. Notice when we become defensive about our own ideas and opinions rather than hearing what others are saying or trying to say. When do we get tugged off into ego defensiveness? Because we all sometimes do. When we do that, we might notice a tightening in our throats or our chests, the rush of blood to our face, a tendency to clench our fists or our jaws. When we close our hearts, that's accompanied by a kind of physical sense of constriction. So noticing these changes, we can slow our responses down. A mindful approach asks us to consciously look and listen for the good, especially in people that we may be predisposed to judge more negatively. The Sanskrit term namaste, that has now been integrated into everyday English vocabulary through yoga classes, means something like, the sacred in me recognizes the sacred in you. We all have some goodness within us, and we can honor that goodness and help to draw it out. In this chapter, I also take on a central paradox, one that I've struggled with in my work in many ways. The paradox of accepting things as they are, even as we act to change the world. So I'd like to read this box 3.3. The paradox of accepting things as they are while acting to change the world. This is one of many paradoxes I had to sit with as I worked out the ideas in this book, and that I still sit with as I work out the tensions and contradictions and paradoxes of some of the things that I'm trying to hold together in this book, particularly by thinking about activism, scholarship, and spiritual pursuits. And the tension, in this case, the paradox of accepting things as they are while acting to change the world. This is on page 94. Is it a contradiction to accept things as they are and simultaneously act to change the world? The perspective I offer here will not surprise people who have fully embraced Buddhism. These are not contradictions at all within that worldview, or at least paradoxes are accepted within a Buddhist perspective. But the current political moment makes this feel more challenging to argue to activists, including my own activist self. In the 1980s, I identified primarily as a teacher and an activist. I worked in a new immigrant community, teaching by day and organizing for solidarity with the people of Central America by night. This was part of the movement, we call it the Solidarity Movement, that was trying to raise awareness about what was happening in Central America at the time and the role of the U.S. government in sponsoring the military actions in those countries. My focus at that time was on making change in the classroom, in my students' lives and futures, in the community, and in the world. During those times, I had some minimal exposure to Buddhism or to Zen-like philosophies of life, but I rejected them out of hand. I saw them as a way of ignoring social injustice, religious institutions conspiring to pacify the masses, keeping people content with their lot. We need to be upset about injustices if we want to change them. We must critically examine the world and refuse to accept it as it is. Through the years, I have not let go of my commitment to social change, but I have changed my perspective about the role of critical analysis in effecting change or ways to go about it. I no longer reflexively, meaning reactively, reject the idea of accepting things as they are, and I accept the paradox of acting in ways that we can accept things as they are and act in ways that can bring about changes. How so? First, accepting things as they are requires that we really see things. We have to open our hearts and minds to look and feel and see what is going on in the world without predetermining what we think or feel. We have to really hear what is being said and see what is being done. This includes acknowledging things that make us uncomfortable or that may not fit with our assumptions about the world. We have to accept our own discomfort and sit with it. This is hard for me. It's hard for all of us. The natural human tendency is to try to push that discomfort out by rejecting, not accepting these things. We see, we acknowledge, and we accept what is as it is. And then we act from where we are in ways that accord with what we want to see in the world. We take action based on what we hope to bring into being, rather than on the basis of what we reject. We be the changes we want to see. Critical analyses may help us see through facades and imagine things in new ways. But there is a danger of getting a little too invested in the critique itself, identified with it, perhaps even inflated by it. This can result in reinforcing the very things we hope to change. As martial arts practitioners know, what we go directly up against, we make stronger. Accepting what is does not mean that we passively absorb it. Not choosing to go up directly against something doesn't mean that we can't dance around it. We can still think about how we want to channel our own energy as we move through what is to something that we can't quite imagine yet. Accepting what is, as it is right now, just means that we act in the here and now in ways that are consistent with the changes we hope to bring about in the world. We're perhaps even more ready to respond rather than react. To respond from a clear, focused, and centered place. So that's my attempt to speak to this seeming paradox of accepting the world as it is while acting to change it. And now I'll conclude with a metta meditation for ethnographers. Metta is a Pali term meaning loving kindness. I've adapted this form of meditation, a metta meditation, from my practice with the Vipassana tradition. I was introduced to this at Inside LA. So sit for a moment quietly, taking up whatever approach to meditation is most comfortable to you. You can pay attention to your breath, listen to the sounds around you, attend to your physical body, and notice your mind. In this case, you can listen to the music and see where it takes you. Or just let it settle and be here with the music right now. After you have centered yourself as best you can in the present moment, let your mind wander deliberately to your field site. Take your mind on a little expedition to the field. Now notice, who are the first people that surface for you in your mind's eye? What emotional responses are evoked for you? Basically, are these people you like? Do you feel a sense of connection, warmth, and resonance? Or dissonance, disconnection, tension, separation? Perhaps your feelings are entirely neutral, but often there is some emotional loading connected with the people who first come to mind. We may not even know why. So notice. Now pick one person from your fieldwork, starting with someone that you do feel warmly toward and that you feel warmth from. Someone you like. Someone you resonate with. Someone that brings some good feelings about your fieldwork to mind. Start with one of them and see if you can see them in your mind's eye and also through your heart mind. Imagine you are looking into their eyes. Sense their subtle bodies. Watch how they move in your mind's eye. See if you can hear their voices. Imagine what is in their hearts. Feel their suchness. You might wonder some things. Do you wonder about them? About how they are living and experiencing the world? Now, try this with someone else. Someone that you feel less strongly aligned with or connected to. Someone maybe neutral or that you simply haven't thought much about. Conjure this person in your mind's eye. Again, notice what thought feelings bubble up for you. What sensations arise in your body. What do you wonder about this person? Can you hear their voices? Can you conjure a clear image of them? Do you have a sense of who they are, their suchness, their beingness? What more would you want to know? So continue in this way with other participants from your field setting. Take all your key informants and one by one, conjure them in your mind's eye. See if you can sense and feel and hear and imagine their beingness. Wonder what you notice. Notice what you feel. Move toward those that you feel least connected with, or perhaps even antagonistic toward. Do this slowly, gradually, noticing subtle changes in your body and the thoughts that arise as well. Importantly, if you start to go off into story, analyzing why you feel as you do or why you think they act as they do, or theorizing about your relationship with these people, just notice that. Come back to the people. Try to connect with them in your mind, heart's eye, not with your ideas about them. Now consider, what would it take to lean in a little more, get a little closer, climb over some of those empathy walls? What might you need to do to tend to in yourself before you're ready to do so? So if you have time, you can continue this process on your own. I'll let the music play before we wrap up. Just keep working through different people from your field site, one by one. And when you're ready, return slowly to the room. When you turn off this tape, you might take some time to journal about the thought feelings that arose as you did this activity. At some point, You might want to bring in your theorizing or analytical mind to investigate what lies underneath the thoughts and the feelings that arose. Investigate with curiosity. Keep wondering. And then, the next time you go out to the field, you might notice how you feel when you next interact with each of these people. And what happens in your field work. Thank you for listening, and thanks again to Andres for the music.